Mason asked. She'd meant the question to be a neutral one, but that wasn't how it came out sounding. Across the gym, Heather said something that made Callum laugh, and Mason felt an envious twinge in her chest. Toby looked down at her and shook his head. "No, Mason," he said. "And you know your spot on the team is locked up." "That's not what I meant. I know. Just understand that it's not something you have to worry about. Not if you keep fighting the way you have been." Toby's gaze drifted back to where Heather stood shaking out her wheat gold hair from its ponytail. It fell across her shoulders like spun honey. Looks-wise, Heather was the exact opposite of Mason with her black hair, winter-pale skin, and blue eyes. "Anyway," Toby was saying, "Palmerston's too high maintenance. I just hate wasted potential, that's all." Mason nodded silently as Toby wandered over to where a couple of boys from the wrestling club were seeing just how hard they could peg each other in the head with a volleyball. Mason fished her aluminum water bottle out of her gear bag and took a long swallow to quench her thirst brought on by the practice. She was tired, but not exhausted, and that was a good sign. Cal was a tough opponent, the toughest, in fact. He was still better than her, in spite of what Toby had said, and Mason was inwardly thrilled that not only had she been able to hold her own against him, but he'd actually seemed to appreciate it. She liked the idea of being appreciated by Callum Aristarchos. A lot. Trying not to glance over to see if he was still chatting with Heather, Mason stuffed her water bottle back in her bag and gathered up the rest of her gear. As she did so, she became aware of a subtle shift in the quality of the light streaming in through the high, arched windows. Mason peered up through the construction scaffolding that had been erected all along the south wall of the hall that housed Gosforth Academy's new athletic center. She was startled to see that the previously clear blue vault of the sky had descended like a dark, heavy blanket, blotting out the sun. Through the windows, Mason saw thick, bruise-black clouds boiling over one another, moving with a swiftness that was almost frightening. She glanced at her watch. It was only early evening, just before dinner, but it suddenly seemed much, much later. The light outside dimmed to an ominous, purplish wash. Well, if the sky was going to open up, Mason thought, at least it wasn't anywhere near as far to get back to her dorm as it had been when the fencing club had had to use the Columbia University gym. That was a good 6 blocks away. Now she just had to run the length of Gosforth's quad in order to get home. It was one of the perks of the new facility. The building used to be the Academy headmaster's residence, but the old Gothic structure had recently been gutted and redesigned, turning it into a multi-purpose center to be used by the gymnastics club and for dance classes and wrestling and, most importantly, as far as Mason was concerned, the fencing team. The sprung wooden floors had been installed only the week before, and the whole place smelled of lumber, varnish, and paint. It was a gorgeous facility, with state-of-the-art equipment wrapped in the antique charm of the building's Gothic architecture. There was even a little raised stage at one end for dance recitals and presentations, and the old stone walls had been left exposed all along one side. Midway down the long north wall, double doors set into a high glass partition led to a soaring vestibule. It was an oddly extravagant feature for an athletics facility, but it was triple-glazed safety glass and probably could have withstood even a hard-flung basketball. It was there to showcase the high stone arch that had once housed a plain, leaded pane window, which Mason's father, as a benefactor to the school, had ordered replaced with a magnificent, stained glass masterpiece. Even on the dullest day, the window caught the sun and shattered it into a million shards of rainbow-brilliant light, casting it across the dark wood-paneled foyer of the new gym, where glass cases stood displaying an abundance of sports championship trophies. Mason smiled as she stared up at the stained glass. She was proud of her father and his commitment to the school, but sometimes she wished he would choose slightly less ostentatious ways to commit. Outside, she saw that the shadows cast by the branches of the old oak tree in the school's quad had begun to wave wildly in the gathering storm. The tree was enormous. It had been planted when the school's original buildings had been constructed in the late 1700s on Manhattan's Upper West Side, and the gusting wind sent showers of leaves, twigs, and acorns clattering against the window and the old slate roof. The overhead fluorescents hanging from the hall's exposed beams flickered and dimmed. When they returned to their normal brightness, the gymnasium seemed to have taken on a slightly sepulchral air. "Whoa," Mason heard Callum say. She turned to see him gazing up at the gathering storm, his eyes wide and forest green in the uncertain light that filtered down through the tall windows. "Hey, Toby?" Cal called. "Maybe we better head back to the dorms. That looks like some pretty serious weather rolling in." "Sure," Toby agreed. "We've done enough work here today. And it'll save you from getting your ass handed to you by your partner."